I remember a couple of years ago, this was when Cheeto won his first administration, and there was this resurgence of like Macho Man Randy Savage attitude that if you weren't like, America first, America, yeah. If you weren't like that, then you were like, not in the team. You were the other side who liked to do things to small innocents. And it was such a disparity in just free thought that they just directly pinned you into either side, right? And then there was this like awakening of like red pill community of men being sick and tired of being dominated by women. And if you think about it, like, when you get down to the nitty gritty and you start to research that on the subsurface level, yeah, there is an argument to be made there. And, I went ahead and bought all these books because I already knew the argument, I already knew the position, but I wanted to see where they come from. So I spent money on this, right? And I bought some books and The Rational Male, the first one, which was awful, the way it was, not the way it was presented, but the way it was written, the font, the scaling. And so I believe that Rollo Tomasi, if that's his name, that's his pen name, he actually released a revised version, and it was just a font issue, spelling issue, formatting issue. That's all it was, right? But the underlining message was actually pretty solid, right? And the rest, he was just trying to cash in on the fame and fortune that the first one made. But this started kicking off this like trend of YouTube commentators, red pill, follow me, I'll teach you how to handle bitches. Yeah, you understand? And it was such a disconnect from what I was, with what I grew up with, right? And the female and male dynamic in that aspect. But then I started seeing that everything was like way too contrived. The message was being like almost handled. Everything was like in order. There was a formula, and I'm like, I know what this is, right? I know exactly what this is. And I was listening to a recent podcast, and I'll probably link it, probably won't. It really doesn't matter. The message is there, and the information is there, right? And this is coming from like former people who subscribe to that ideology, and sometimes people who actually produced red pill content. And they were saying, yo, this whole shit is like fucking set up, bro. There's like hidden hands behind this shit. Like every movement that creates a following, like a major following, all of a sudden when you start to pull back and you start to look at this from like a 40,000 foot view, right? From an eagle eye perspective, you start to see that there is that there's a hidden hand. And remember when like Andrew Tate came onto the scene, and all of a sudden he was like this one dude out of complete nowhere, right? He came out of nowhere onto the scene, and in young men outside of Joe Rogan started finding this like big brother, leader that they can look up to. And I remember going to work, and all the dudes at work who recently found out about this whole, you see this shit, this red pill shit. Like I'm like, dude, you're so fucking late to the game, bro, right? But then they started preaching this fucking Andrew Tate. And I'm like, who the hell is this Andrew Tate, bro? Right? So that was years ago. Now you fast forward to 2024 and even late 2023 when people started digging deep and going into like the history of who this guy was and who other people within that scene were. Dude, you're talking about agency control handlers, bro. Like Andrew Tate's father was Central Intelligence, right? So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And then when you see this kid come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden he's like the biggest star in the world with the biggest voice in the world outside of Joe Rogan, right? And then you see people like him and others who have close ties to that circle start to blow up out of nowhere. The red pill message, red pill community, the manosphere, right? All of a sudden, like, $30,000, $40,000 sets and lights and cameras and production teams. And dude, come to find out, like, if you guys follow, I think her name was Wendy Webb. She is probably one of like the deepest and like most thorough investigators out there right now. I think that's her name, Wendy Webb. She started looking into all these fools, bro, on top of all the other shit that she looks into. Like, I'm talking about international banking cartel, governments. Like, she also looks into like the whole Epstein situation. She has actually the most thorough breakdown of that like situation, right? But she started looking into the manosphere. And bro, she fucking tore that thing apart, man. She's like, yo, this is all intelligence. And then like most of these like channels had like army intel fucking ties and shit. And wouldn't you know, there's this one channel here in South Florida who was blowing up out of nowhere. And all of a sudden they decided to blow the whistle and say, yo, like most of this information here, most of these channels, most of this movement is being handled, bro. It's being handled by intelligence outfit, like army intel outfits. Most of these dudes were like former military, and they still like work for private companies. And then you're like, yo, that's when you start to know and you start to say that this thing is being like this, like kind of like the right and the left, like they all have fucking ties to shady shit, right? And it turns out that that whistleblower all of a sudden, boom, demonetized on YouTube, and they started removing videos. They started going after him. And that's when you know that when you're flying over the target and you start to get flack, right? That's when you hit a nerve, right? And so like we have to be careful on who we listen to, because like all of a sudden you notice how like things start to go viral out of nowhere, and you're like, how the fuck does something like pop on Monday and by Friday is like headline news? Dude, hidden hand, bro. I'm telling you, like information, we have to be very careful. Like I said in previous video, we have to be very careful like what we listen to, but like sponge everything in and take everything in, but with a grain of salt, and also be aware of where the information is coming from. And all you got to do is like put two and two together, see where this guy's coming from, see where that channel's coming from. And then when you start to see like, bro, listen, once you start to read Edward Bernays, who was the grandfather of propaganda, and propaganda was renamed into public relations because the four-letter N-word from the 40s, it starts with N and ends with an I, and it was led by the guy with a little mustache, right? That's why they changed the name propaganda to public relations, right? This is Edward Bernays, this is the nephew of Sigmund Freud. Once you start looking into that shit, bro, you start to say to yourself, man, nothing gets past me now. Like, I have to see everything with my third eye. And when you do, you'll start to like disseminate information and start thinking freely for yourself. And that's why, like, I barely even read news anymore, like, because I know that it's all handled. Bro, even gaming news, even entertainment news, there's always like a hidden hand and like an agenda behind everything.